Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we have with us another incredible guest. We have with us Nayan, who is the co-founder of Avegen Health. And what's cool about Nayan is he's got a clinical background, he's got a background in pharma, and more than a decade of experience in digital health. So it's an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Nayan. How are you?
I'm very good, Abdul, and thank you for having me on the show. It's a great opportunity also for us to speak about what we have been doing and where the sector is going.
No, definitely. So you've been in digital health and pharma for many years, but we like to take the story all the way back to the very beginning. So a young Nayan, tell us about your motivations to kind of study medicine, and then please kind of bring us to present day with the incredible work you're doing at Avegen.
Mhm. Happy to. So I went into medicine because I think in India, when I was growing up, there were only two careers that one could do, either be an engineer or be a medic. So not too many options, unlike today. But I was more interested on the healthcare side. So instead of doing engineering, I went into medicine. And to a certain extent, I think my work in digital health probably starts with my experience when I was an intern. So here you would call it a foundation year. And a lot of the times when I would work with patients, what I realized was that their health outcomes depended a lot on what they did at home or outside the four walls of a clinic. And as a physician, especially a young one, I had very limited ability and tools to influence their choices outside the hospital. And then later in my career, when I was running clinical trials, I had the opportunity to interact with consultants who were treating patients living with HIV. And a lot of them told me that, man, it's fantastic that companies are coming out with drugs, but what we also need is a way to influence our patients and get them to comply with medications and live a healthier life. And we can't do that today. And so at that time, along with a colleague of mine, we decided to start what you today call a digital therapeutic, which was using an interactive voice response system to educate the patients about what is good quality of care when it comes to HIV, remind them about their medication, and also importantly, for any sort of issues that they had during taking these medications, they could call into a toll-free number, and the system would essentially guide them through a sequence of questions, and then give them advice saying that stop the medication, take this over-the-counter drug, or you don't have to worry, you can just continue with the medication. So that was, I would say, my first experience with digital health, and that was the first time when I saw the potential of what health technology or digital technology could do for healthcare delivery. And then moved to a big pharma where I led a team that built digital products for cardiology and for obesity. And during that experience, what I realized is that the way we develop products in digital is very different from the analog world. In a
Mm,
drug, you take 8 to 10 years to bring the
yeah.
drug to the market, and once you have the molecule, it essentially stays the same. The molecule fundamentally doesn't change, but that's not how software product is developed. You get the first version out, which should be good, and then you learn from it and you iterate and you get better over time. But unfortunately, the model of building digital health products was very onerous. It would take 12 months, sometimes 18 months to come up with the first version of the product. And I felt at that time that there was a better way to do this. So at Avgen, what we have taken, the approach that we've taken is the platform approach. So rather
Mm,
than trying to build a product for a specific indication, what we've tried to do is identify what are the common building blocks of a digital product. So, for example, we need the ability to educate a patient. That's common across most digital health products. So, we have tried to sort of build these, think of it like Lego blocks. We build these Lego blocks, and then whenever we look at a different sort of indication, we are able to quickly deploy a digital health product which is safe, which is secure, and which is impactful. So we are trying to reduce the time to build digital health product, going from months now to potentially weeks. And today I think we've built around On our platform, we have around 12 different digital health products, and
Mhm.
across all of them, we probably have more than 1.5 million people who have downloaded these products. So that's the story from beginning to now.
No, definitely.
Amazing.
We're going to take apart the story in different aspects. Tell us about the experience or the change in dynamic when you're a clinician and then you go work for this big pharma company. Because
Mhm.
obviously they they have different agendas and different goals, as you can imagine, to a clinician. Tell us about that transition.
Absolutely. I think when I was working as a clinician, there was definitely a lot of suspicion about big pharma.
Yeah.
Like, like and in some way, I think when I decided to move out of clinical practice and into pharma, some of my seniors at that time, oh, you're going over to the dark side.
Yeah.
So, I would say that was probably the trending topic when I decided to switch careers. But I do believe that that experience in pharma has been invaluable in
Mm,
what I do today, because I think what I learned in big pharma is how does one look at what are the major sort of unmet needs in the healthcare ecosystem, and then how does one develop a product that addresses these needs. Because at the end of the day, we can all come up with ideas, but the ideas that have an impact are the ones that scale. And
mm,
what I really learned in pharma is all about the business of healthcare, not just from a
mm.
commercial perspective, but also from a development perspective, regulatory perspective, compliance perspective. So it made me much more suitable to doing what I'm doing today. I think without that experience in pharma, I think it would have been much harder for me.
Nayan, are you able to tell us a little bit about, because a lot of our listeners, right, they'll have healthcare related products and ideas in their minds. And none of our previous guests, we've never really been able to dive into the regulatory sort of legal aspect of these things. Are you able to just sort of break down some of the key sort of stumbling blocks when it comes to building a healthcare related product and thinking about information
Yeah,
governance or sort of what it's classified as?
I think when we look at regulatory is used as a catch-all phrase, and but if you break it down, it covers a lot of things. So one, you have data privacy, right? So that's the information governance piece. Then you have medical device classification, so that's the second piece. And then the third piece, you actually have also post marketing surveillance, so the safety aspects of the product. So broadly, I think those are the three. If you go from regulatory, I think you need to look at information governance.
Mm,
You need to you need to look at what is your medical device classification strategy, and then you need to look at, once it is in the market, what is your post marketing support or surveillance that one needs to do. And just for this discussion, let's keep data privacy aside for a bit.
mm,
When you just look at medical device classification and post marketing, it comes down to what is it that you want to claim, or what is it as a company you claim that your product will do. Now, if you claim that what your product does is support patients, right? It could be, for example, some of the products in the market which are more in the health and wellness space. They're not claiming that this is a treatment or this is a preventive tool or this is a diagnostic tool. In
mm,
those instances, they will not get classified as a medical device, because as a manufacturer of that medical device, of that product, you're not claiming that this is a treatment, diagnosis, or prevention. So the intended use, that's
mm,
that's critical. Now,
mm,
if your intended use is one of these, like diagnosis, prevention, or treatment, then most likely it will get classified as a medical device. It will be a medical device. Then the
mm,
question is that, is it a class one, class four, a class two medical device? And there, what you have to look at is, what is the risk profile of your product. So if it is low, then it is generally class one, and then if it is high, where there's a risk of death, then that becomes class three. So I think when we are looking at developing products, I think the two key things to assess is, what is the intended use that you want to claim as a manufacturer, and the second one is, what is the safety profile of the drug, and that will influence the strategy. And now just closing up on the data side of it, that's an entirely different stream where one has to look at, are you a data processor, are you a data collector, what are your uh, compliance requirements from a country perspective? Do you have to hold the data locally? Can you hold the data in a different country? So that I would say is the other aspect that a startup or a manufacturing company needs to pay attention to. But they end up getting classified as regulatory, but those are actually two very very different things.
You broke it down well. Um, the question I wanted to ask was, what kind of triggered the jump? I know you talked about it into kind of digital health and Avegen, and tell us about, AMS is a big fan of this, the 0 to 1, the early days of Avegen. I know you have more than 1 million downloads, loads of people using multiple different countries. Actually, I know in the beginning it wasn't like this. Tell us about those early days.
The early days, I think, I would say the first year probably was the hardest, I think, year, because when you start, you just have an idea, right? And in our case, the first idea that we had actually did not work at all, and it took us 3 years to realize that, oh, this idea is not going to go anywhere. And I think it was probably the third or the fourth year when we realized that, through the failure of our first idea, we had an asset that could become extremely relevant and extremely impactful. We also had the added challenge that when we were founded in two locations. So we had a company in UK and a company in India. So when the founders were split across two countries, it was actually quite hard to, one, raise funding, and the second one also for us as a founding team to find our chemistry, because distance plays a big role, time zone plays a big role. And when we started back in 2015, it was not that easy to, I mean, you could call, but it was very expensive. Nowadays, we can pick up a call equity, and you
Yeah.
literally pay for data, or you don't even pay for that now. So when we started, I think it was much harder to stay on the same page, much harder to resolve conflicts, and yeah. So in some way, I think we learned a lot through that experience and through the challenges that were thrown at us. And what for me the big learning is, the key thing in the early days. I know it sounds very cliched, but as founders, to be aligned in terms of what you're trying to build, not in terms of the product itself, but as a company. Are you trying to build a lifestyle business? Are you trying to build a scalable business? Are you trying to, getting that lined up? It's hard because it takes a lot of conversations and some really difficult conversations. But I wish that we had actually spent a little bit more time aligning as founders on what we are trying to build as an organization, if you see what I mean.
Just going back to, there's a lot of questions that came up that I didn't plan to ask, but now I want to ask is, tell us a bit more about how you managed to get over this founder conflict, how you managed to work in two different time zones to where you are now. The first question. And the second question is, tell us a bit more about when you started to know something is going wrong. Because I know we have a lot of health tech founders and entrepreneurs. You're building something for 3 years. In the world of business, that's a long, long time. So how you deal with founder conflict and got together, and what were the signs of realizing a product is failing and you need to iterate or move on?
Sure. So I think the way we got through those conflict, and we only partly succeeded, because when we started, I think we were actually four of us, and then it ended up that the two of us bought out the other two co-founders. So I would say it worked out for both parties. I think today both the companies are doing well. But in terms of, I think, conflict resolution, constant communication, and even to this day, like every morning, I speak to Neeraj, who's my co-founder, every morning. And sometimes I think, I'm like, oh, there's not much to talk today. But when we talk, we end up speaking for like 30, 45 minutes, and there's always things to talk about. So it's become a pattern with us that every morning, we speak for 30 to 45 minutes about everything that's happening in the company, things that are on top of his mind, on top of my mind. So I think the key, that was a key change. Like previously we would catch up, once in 2 days or once in 3 days, and it just isn't enough.
Mm.
Agenda-less conversations are, I think, how relationships get built. That's the first one. And the second one is, we really pushed ourselves to write down what is important to us, like what is important to us as individuals. Like for us, it's very important that we are a performance oriented company. At the same time, we are a company that actually employees come, they learn, they grow as individuals. So we want to give opportunities for people who have been inside the company first, so that they can stretch their legs and see and evolve as people. So we really pushed ourselves to write these things down, which are
Mm.
important to us. And then when you exchange it, we realize that we are actually more aligned in terms of where we want the company to go to and how we want the company to evolve. So in some sense, sometimes if I'm faced with a situation, I generally have a sense of what Neeraj's opinion will be, and I'm sure it is vice versa. And I think that has come through constant communication and really forcing ourselves to articulate our thoughts. Some of these thoughts we assume that the other person knows, but it's most of the time it's not the case. So I think really articulating that and speaking it out. And sometimes, when you are with the third party, they can sometimes ask you those questions, ask you that open-ended questions, which forces both the founders to really come, quote unquote, come clean on what
Mm.
matters to them. So that's how, I think, how we got through that initial phase. In terms of your second question on what are the early signs that a product is not working, hindsight is obviously always 2020. The first thing I think is the one has to get traction, right? And or one has to build momentum. Now that traction could be based on number of users or listeners, end users. It could that's one. The second one obviously is, what Y Combinator has made very popular is doubling revenue growth, I think every 2 weeks or something like that. But it's fundamentally, it's about traction. Are you building traction? Have you in terms of identifiable numbers, have you gone from, say, 1 to 2? That could be user numbers, that could be revenue. That's the second one. The third, I think, leading indicator is that, when from a financial perspective, when you realize that the cost of selling, not what you're selling it for, the cost of selling what your product is, if that is significantly higher, if it is high, that's a big sign. Because what that means is that when you're going out to your customer group, getting one customer is actually costing you a lot more than what you could charge that customer.
Mm.
In our instance, that's what it took us a while to figure out, that even though we technically had a large accessible market, the cost of getting one customer was so high that there was no way that product would scale, or that service would scale.
Mm.
And it I mean, it's hindsight now, but at some point of time the penny dropped, saying that there's no way this is going to become a meaningful business. It could be an interesting business, but definitely not a
Mm.
meaningful business.
Nayan, so you could frame, right, the first product as it failed, right? But you can also frame it as that you took away some key lessons that then sort of informed you and taught you a lot for your second product, right? So if you were to look back now, again, retrospectively looking, what are some key lessons that you learned that then really sort of propelled you in your second product?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. In terms of, I think, the key lesson today, what our platform is, it has its origination in the first idea that we tried, because
Mm.
we needed a platform to support the service that we had launched. And today, I'm sure there is code in the platform that was written 8 years back,
Oh wow.
100%, right? But the lesson I think that we learned, and this I can't say that this is something that I figured out, but I think this all credit goes to Neeraj. I think what Neeraj had realized, because he also has more experience. This is his second time as an entrepreneur, and he had worked with a lot of startups before in his previous startup. And what he had realized is that products fail, but platforms don't fail generally,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
A product can fail, but a platform has a higher likelihood of success. So when he initially was building the platform, he always had that mindset. He's like, whatever I build today, even if this idea doesn't work, we should be able to use this in a different product mix. And because of that, even though those 3 years in some sense we could say was a write-off, it wasn't a write-off, because the nucleus of what we have today was done in those first
Mm.
3 years. So I think as founders, I think it's important to, yes, you have an idea today, but it is important to see, can you build assets that even if your idea today is not working out, it could be the starting off point or a jumping off point for your next idea.
And now take us on to sort of talk to us about the third product that you've built. How do you go? So you've talked about 0 to 1. Great. It's been challenging. You've had a few failures. You've taken lessons forward, right? How do you now go from one to several? How do you scale this now?
That's what we are learning now. And in some sense, I think as CEOs and founders, you end up reinventing yourself. You have to, because
Mm.
what worked for 0 to 1 is not something that would work for 1 to 100. I think when you're
Mm.
switching to 1 to 100 as founders and as CEO, the key change is that you need to bring on board people who are better at a particular function, right? In the 0 to 1, as founders, you end up doing everything. You end up doing the conceptualization, the early marketing, getting the first bunch of
Everything.
building everything, right? Everything like what you guys are doing today. But once you reach a point where you've sort of established, okay, this is what we want to scale, it then all becomes about, can you attract the right people into the business, right? Who are experts at what they do. Are you able to support them both philosophically and financially to execute on their plans? Are you able to hold them accountable for what needs to be delivered? So I think in that 1 to 100, it, as founders, the key differentiator will be one's ability to attract, retain, and manage people who are more specialized in a particular activity. And
Mm.
what our role as CEOs and founders become is, we become storytellers. I mean, what I'm doing today, right? Most of my job will be about telling the story, like, what is Avgen, what does Avgen want to achieve, where does Avgen want to be, right?
Mm.
That it becomes a bigger and bigger part of what you spend your time on. So
Mm. Amazing.
I think
Amazing.
you're the second founder that said once you get product market fit, growing and scaling companies about recruiting the right talent and retaining the talent, and the role of the founder and the CEO changes. So it's very interesting to see two successful companies saying more or less the same thing. I wanted to talk a bit more about Avegen. So am I right in understanding, like you described, it's a platform which is kind of like, I think one of the popular one is the HealthMachine, where you can build on it and use it for separate. I think you're disease agnostic, right? Tell us a bit more about the pilot you did at King's College Hospital. The reason I'm asking is obviously me and Amzu, we studied and was at King's College London anyway, so it's obviously close to our heart. But tell us the start to finish, because
sure.
people are very interested in who came with the idea. Did they come to you? Did you approach them? How it worked? How you deployed, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I touch upon that, I think what Health Machine is trying to do is trying to make it easier to deploy digital health products. A
Mhm.
little bit like, what Shopify did for e-commerce, right? Tomorrow, if you
Mm.
want to open an e-commerce store, you go to Shopify and you set up your store. people rarely build their own e-commerce stores now. So that's what we're trying to do for digital health products with HealthMachine. So what happened with King's College was that I knew the professor from some of the previous work that I had done with King's College around digital, and she had done initial sort of proof of concept for a treatment for paranoia, and it was done using some off-the-shelf software which was on a desktop. And she was very optimistic about the intervention because it was a slightly different modality, and she'd done a lot of work in that space. So we ended up connecting over how digital could be used to launch this product for treating paranoia. Um, so I would say she's the scientific expert and the brains behind the concept. And what I and Avgen brought to the table was the technology expertise, the platform, and probably some of the commercial expertise that is required to make these sort of products successful. The way it worked is that we worked with her very closely on applying for an NIHR grant, and we were able to pretty much mock up a whole product which she was able to include with her application. So that, I think, really brought the product to life for the reviewers, and she was able to secure a fairly sizable grant from NIHR. And then after a procurement process, we were selected to set up the product on HealthMachine, and through that we realized that we also had to get MHRA approval, which was a new thing for them, new thing for us. There was a bit of a blip in the beginning because it was uncharted territory for everyone. And then we got the approval, I think, around this time last year. So it's probably been just about a year, or just coming up to a year. And then now the clinical trial is ongoing. We just sent an interim report, and hopefully, if the product is successful, then we will be able to launch the product in the market on a commercial basis. So that's how it has worked, and it is quite novel because paranoia is a fairly common symptom in psychosis, and currently, just from a capacity perspective, the healthcare providers are not able to sometimes support these patients. So hopefully for uh, people with mild paranoia, this could become a modality of treatment, um, versus going to a clinic to get therapy sessions. So I'm very excited, and I think Jenny, who is the clinician, has been phenomenal to work with, because she truly understands how digital can be used to deliver interventions at scale.
Just to dive into that sort of initial phase, right? So, say someone comes to you with an idea. I've got an idea, an opportunity, I've got some insight, right? And they want your consult. What are the first three questions that you ask them from your sort of tech problem solving background?
Excellent question. I think the first one that we generally ask is, what is the intended use? So is it a treatment, or is it more around support? So that's the first question. What is the intended use? The second question for us is that, what exactly is the intervention, right? Is it cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it tracking, things like that? So what is the mechanism of action? What exactly is the intervention? That's the second one. And the third one that we are really, what is important for us is that, what is their midterm to long term plan? And it could be that a researcher will come to and says, I think this is a product that I want to research, and the end game is having publications or presentations at a conference. That could be one very valid sort of end game. The second one could be that we want to use this as a value added service for our patients, which is generally what pharmaceutical companies come to us with. Or the third one could be that I want to launch this product because I believe that there's a need for this product in the market. So the third question is probably the answer to the third question is probably the most important one for us, because we don't want to end up working with people who are just trying this for let's just try what happens, because then nothing happens, and we all spend a lot of time and effort essentially achieving nothing. So for me, I think we want to work with people who have a midterm to long term vision
Yeah.
for the digital health product, because if the product succeeds, then all of us succeed. We
Yeah.
just don't want to just try it, and if the commitment is not there to the
Mm.
product or to the idea, then it's not the right partner for us.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
A follow-on question I had, and the way you described it is very good. I'm thinking I will title the podcast like this as well. You're building the Shopify for digital health products.
Correct.
What we've seen more recently is a lot of people are bringing in a lot of stuff in-house. They're building the tech, they're building it within themselves, within the company. Um, how do you go and attract other people or convince them to a certain degree to build on HealthMachine, to build with Avgen, rather than saying, hey, we've got some fundraising or we've got some sort of funding, we're going to get our own developer or some sort of freelancer? What are you offering as a company to these individuals?
Very good question. So, and you're absolutely right that there are companies who are trying to bring this in-house. And I would say by default, most startups actually try and do this in-house.
Mm.
Now, the difference is if you go back, say, 10 years, right, when AWS was sort of coming to place, every software company used to host their own servers. Right?
Mm.
That was default. Like you would never go cloud. Today, I don't think anybody does local.
No.
Who does local? Nobody. Everybody's either on AWS, Azure, or Google. So we are probably at the leading edge of that, right? Where today people want to build it in house when they realize that it takes them 12 months, sometimes millions, right? And the product that they get, they're like, oh, this is not what I actually asked for. And then they're back to square one. Some of them are, I think, I'm not saying it's always the case, but it happens more often than we think
Mm.
it happens, right? So working with us, one, we have a platform which is scaled. We can support products in Europe, in North America, in Asia, right? Now, for anyone else, it's going to be very hard to get to that level of maturity in the platform in a short span of time. So one is that
Mm.
first. The second thing is time to market, because at the end of the day, in software, it's about, can you quickly get your product into the hands of your end users, because that's when you learn if you have traction or if you don't have traction, going back to what we said earlier, right? And you could save years, right, by
Mm.
just getting your hands into the end of the year. And if it doesn't work, great, wash your hands off, move on to the next one. So I think working with Avgen and HealthMachine, that's what we bring to the table. Some people get it, some people don't. But I think over time, if you look at most industries, right, they all end up adopting a platform. I mean, look at us now, right? You have adopted a platform to do your podcast.
Mm.
5 years back, that is not how this would have been done.
Mm.
So eventually, I think most industries end up having a leading platform, and our ambition is that HealthMachine becomes the platform, if not, I mean, one of the platforms, if not the platform, that people say, I have an idea for a digital health solution. Let me build it on HealthMachine and host it on HealthMachine.
Mm.
No, I think the analogy you gave makes complete sense. The AWS analogy, the switch from local to AWS Azure. And I think because of the rapid innovation, the rapid rollout of digital health products, you need a platform like HealthMachine to get it out there, to test it, to get that traction, to then take it to the next level. Like you said,
Absolutely.
we've built products in the past ourselves, and it takes forever. And the advantage you have is not only speed, it's the experience of 3 or 4 existing products in the market, and you can
Yeah.
already speak to founders like, hey, we know you want to do this, but from my experience, you should do it like this, and so on. The
And
question,
sometimes
yeah,
sometimes it's not just experience, right? It's also data. Like we can
yeah,
literally show data saying that, okay, you want this super cool UI UX. We have tried it. This is what the drop off rate is. If you still want to do it, we'll consider it. But like I keep telling some of our customers, I'm like, what we have learned over time is based on experience and data. We
Mm.
think this is the minimum that you need.
Mm.
Subtracting from this, you really need to convince us that this is not the bare minimum that you require. Addition,
Yeah.
maybe, but subtracting, it's hard learned lessons,
Yeah.
and that's the advantage. Like we can actually advise them on what works, what doesn't work, not just based on our instinct, but based on the
Data.
data that we've seen from end users.
And I think that success compounds. And the following question is, how do you meet in the middle? Because
Right.
at the end of the day, even for your business model, you're offering a service and they want to perhaps purchase it, or they want to do something that you tested a hypothesis theory or some sort of product. How do you meet in the middle where you agree and you can kind of convey that data, convey that experience to the client in terms of the product they want to build?
Yeah, so what we do is that we have what is called like a starter app. It's a little bit like a theme, right? On like a website theme. There are parts of it that can be configured, uploaded, colors can be changed, content can be uploaded, and then what our clients bring in is the unique insight that they have for a specific disease area. So for example, for one of our uh, customers, they are interested in launching a digital health product for digestive health. Now, the unique insight that they brought in based on their user research is that the users want to know what are the food that actually triggers their diarrhea. That's the tent pole feature that their users want, right? So that will essentially be like a custom module that only their product will have. So it's a bit like, you have the basic version of the car, and then the add-ons which make the car uniquely yours is what our customers bring. So that's how we meet in the middle, because in our absence, what they would do is that they would end up rebuilding a lot of things like an authentication module,
Yeah.
uh, a database layer, a visualization layer. So all of that is just out of the box. What they add is that, that extra bit which only they know. Like for example, in the King's College, they know the disease area. They know what is the intervention that they have to do to help treat the patients. We don't, right? So that's where we meet. That's where we meet in the middle.
No, definitely. In a sense, it's very smart. It's a genius way of doing things. And I'm thinking in the future, many clinicians, they don't want to go and start up their own startup or a spin out, all their headache, and they want to have existing platforms. And the way you described it, it's amazing.
And in,
Yeah.
in my worldview, realistically or unrealistically, if we get to a stage where a clinician can say, hey, this Nayan needs this product, in which we need a module which will teach him about good nutrition, how to become fitter, how to manage his emotional health. He needs to be able to track his blood pressure and say, I'm just making this up, like
Yeah.
how many times he sneezes in a day, and then essentially there is a bespoke app for that
Yeah.
patient. I mean, that's taking it to the limit, right? And it's a whole long tail strategy. So if we can enable that, even come halfway there, then I think we'll probably have digital products that that people use, because it
No.
actually supports them in their healthcare journey. And so that's my unrealistic
So, Nayan, I want to now dive into yourself as a person, right? So, we've talked about regulations, product, 0 to 1, 1 to 100, right? Tell me about you. So, from clinician to all of this, right? As an entrepreneur, the highs, the lows, right? What drives you? Why? Why have you traded like the stable career of being a clinician where everything is stable, the mortgage comes in, the income comes in, to being an entrepreneur? Tell us what drives you.
over the years. What I've learned about myself is that I don't do well when the when what to do has already been decided, if you see what I mean. Like I think the job that I really did not like was a global PM role, where the SOPs were all well written, the forms that needed to be complete was all there, and I did well because I have a reasonable amount of intelligence, but I did not enjoy it because the path was clearly laid out. I just had to be good at following the path. I think what really energizes me is that when things are unknown, like where I have to figure out, okay, what the path is. And over the years, I think what I have matured into is that I've realized that some of this I can't do on my own, and I need to work with people who have the intelligence, the technical ability to find a path together. So that's, I think, one of the reasons um, I have kept reinventing myself, because once you sort of have figured it out, then I'm like, okay, so what's next? What is the next thing that I need to figure out? And thankfully, I think my wife has been supportive. If she had said, oh, why are you leaving this corporate high flying she job, and I don't want to like compromise, then it would be out of the question. But she's been always been very supportive, that she's not tried to make me someone that I'm not. So supporting that, I think, has been very important. I think as founders, I think over the years I've realized that that's very important. If your partner is not supportive of your journey, then it becomes too much, right? Because you're fighting it at home, you're fighting at work, and it doesn't work. So I think it's very important to have the right partner in life. So
Absolutely. And you use the word reinventing quite a lot. So our listeners will be doctors wanting to dabble in different areas, right? If someone is thinking of reinventing themselves, discovering new skills, new passions, give them 3 tips. What 3 tips would you give for someone to start to rediscover themselves and reinvent themselves?
I think the first one, which I think doctors by our training have, is that we are like, yes, we think this is how a patient will respond, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way. So fundamentally, our training helps us prepare for unpredictability, right? We just have the skill sets, right? We think in a structured way, we're trained in a particular way to handle things that we cannot predict is going to happen. So that, I think, is a big advantage that clinicians have. And I've learned it now more than ever, that nothing phases me, because there's nothing as stressful as having a bleeder and trying to figure out where the bleeder is, and then you just have to get it sorted, right? So I think clinicians are very well equipped to handle the rigors of entrepreneurship. So that's the first step. I don't think we should underestimate how much of an advantage it is for clinicians who are taking the entrepreneurial journey. That's the first one. The second one, I think, is to stay committed, because, like, for me, I can't believe it's been 8 years that I've been at this, and as long as you know that you're making progress towards building something that you want to build, I think staying committed to that journey, I think, is very important. And the third one, and I say reinvention, but the third one is fully committing to it, because as clinicians, I think that's the other. I do not know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage. We could do clinic one day a week, then we could do like a startup some other day a week, we could consult for a company. So we have options, right? We all have a lot of options, but sometimes to do something meaningful, you have to commit to a particular thing for a reasonable amount of time. So I think the third one is, commit. Like, it could be for 6 months, it could be for a year, but commit, because even if it doesn't work, you can always go back and practice. I mean, as long as you keep your license updated, you can always go back. So the cost of failure is very, very low for doctors. So I do think that clinicians are very well equipped, and maybe the bonus one is get familiar with the business. It's not rocket science. It just takes a little bit of effort to understand, financial model, understand marketing, but at least get some awareness, so that you don't, at least when somebody is telling you real stuff and somebody who's trying to take you for a ride. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. And my last question that I have for you is that when you are, so say, as you've done before, right? You were a clinician before, you went into pharma and everything else. A lot of it involved learning. Right? How do you learn best? What resources do you pull on? how do you develop new skills when it comes to, because entrepreneurship involves learning new things every single day pretty much. So how do you learn?
Two things. One, I think I learned from other individuals. So I over the years I have established good relationships with people from different um, sectors. So I know a couple of friends who are VCs. I know a couple of friends who are technologists. I know a couple of friends who are marketeers. So whenever I'm faced with a question that I do not know the answer to, I feel like in my network of contacts there is someone who will
Hmm.
know the answer, or who'll at least give me an opportunity to discuss it through, and then we can um, come up with the solution. So I think that's one. The second thing that I've done, I've recently started doing, it's probably been a year and a half, where every major decision that I take, I try to write it down and
Hmm.
keep a record of it. And then once in a while, I'll go back and then I'll color code them. Oh, this decision worked out well. This
Hmm.
and this really did not work out well, and sort of understand what was I thinking when I did these decisions, and what were the assumptions that I had made which worked out, and the ones that did not work out. And then hopefully the next time I take the decisions, my decision making muscle ha-
Hmm.
is actually stronger because I've reflected on what went well and what did not go well. And sometimes it's not so much the decisions, right? It's the assumptions that you've made to arrive at a decision that you have to revisit. So that's, I think, those are the two ways I think that I have tried to stay ahead in terms of the growth of Avegen.
Building that decision muscle, and I know some people call it, I've read it a few times, is they try to fine tune their gut instinct.
Yeah,
They try to figure out what did they do in that moment in time that made to a certain positive outcome, what they did to a negative outcome. And I think it's true, you probably can figure it out or at least strengthen it, which is very interesting. You said, um, because sometimes clinicians or sometimes staff fund, especially in digital health, they're very data driven rather than the assumptions in that moment in time making a positive outcome led decision. Um, the last question I have from me is, you've done incredibly well. You've learned a lot of lessons. What does the future hold for Avgen? What are you looking to achieve in the next 8 years? Let's say.
so I think in the next year, 8 years, at the end of 8 years, for me, if we become recognized as a leading global player when it comes to digital health solutions, that is what I'm aiming for. That's the first one. The second one is the company getting, maybe even not even 8 years, maybe even in the next 3 to 4 years, the
Mm,
company getting to a stage where where it does not where it does not require the founders. And
mhm,
I'm not saying that it's because Neeraj and I are like tired, not at all. To the contrary, because if a company is dependent for its growth on founders, that means the founders haven't done a good job,
mm.
right? Because if you look at all the successful companies that we know around you, even if the founder leaves, the companies continue to grow and grow for
Yeah.
decades. I mean, hundreds of years companies grow. They become a entity in itself. And I
Mm,
think as founders, I think we should aspire to build companies like that go beyond us. And so for me, I think if Avgen even halfway towards that, where somebody else, the next crop of people come in and can continue to grow the company and attract people. Avgen attracts people to join. That I think for me will be a phenomenal success.
no, that's incredible. And the way you're describing it and your vision, I wouldn't be surprised to see in a few years if it's like, there's no code tools, like Webflow and Squarespace. You go to the health machine and you can just drag and drop all these diseases and all these different regulations and DTAC and all these wonderful things they do nowadays, and then deploy, right? So
Absolutely,
that'd be very cool and fun to see.
absolutely. Cross fingers. So that's what we are trying. I think we're trying to get to that
Yeah, of
drag and
course.
drop. A little bit like when you're ordering a car, right? You just
Yeah,
select, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this, and voila, that's
yeah.
what you'll get at the end of it.
So let's see what the future holds. But you're very well on that journey and on that path.
Thank
Once
you.
again, I want to thank you, Nan, for taking the time out, for sharing this journey, I think you're one of the first guests that is doing something slightly different in terms of digital health, the Shopify experience per se, and just sharing your a bit of honesty in terms of your conflict, the early days is very heartening for us actually and our listeners.
Oh, thank you, Abdul. Thank you, Hamza. I also enjoyed the conversations. It was good questions, and all the very best to you guys also.
No
Thank
worries.
you so
Thank you,
much.
and thank you to our listeners.